Ohio State football 2022 with national championship aspirations, of course. We will get a look at the Buckeyes at the Shoe in the spring game. Scarlet and Gray offense and defense. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. We invite everyone to leave your comments and questions in the live stream, in the live chat. And of course, this is a special edition of our Buckeyes live weekly live stream. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing, Mark?
I am doing just fine. Appreciate Pat stopping by as always each and every week. Thought we would go live today for a few minutes to take, again, comments and questions. Unfortunately, this spring game will be marked by the death of Dwayne Haskins. Any death tragic, but at 24 years old, my goodness, I think we were all hit pretty hard last Saturday with the news. Before we get to the festivities that are being planned, just your thoughts about Dwayne Haskins, both on and off the field, with a different perspective that you have as you've interacted with him on occasion.
Sure. On the field, obviously, just looking at his time at Ohio State, which is the time I, was really focused on Dwayne. I mean, what a player he was. I wrote about this past week that he helped change the Ohio State offense into what you see today. I mean, before you think about it, it was Braxton Miller, it was JT Barrett, guys who could throw the ball around, but did a lot of running. Dwayne Haskins allowed Urban Meyer, sort of forced Urban Meyer, along with Ryan Day, to transition into the more pass-heavy offense we've seen recently. Quarterbacks not running the ball as much. Justin Fields obviously ran the ball, but it was still a more pass-heavy offense. The ability of Dwayne opened quarterbacks' eyes to the fact that Ohio State could be a destination for, true pocket passer, pro-style quarterbacks, and that's what Ryan Day's kind of carried on with his time as a head coach, and you see that in the guys that they're recruiting these days. They want guys that can throw the ball first, and if then they can run or do something else also, that's a great thing. Off the field, I mean, everyone's heard the stories by now, over a week out from Dwayne's tragic passing, or almost a week, I guess, that, about just the person he was. I mean, say what you will about how his NFL career went. What I thought was most interesting was the outpouring of emotion from guys he played with, from guys he didn't play with at both Ohio State and the NFL level. You look at his Instagram and you see pictures of him with starters on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was the third string quarterback who didn't dress. Usually that's not the most popular guy in a locker room. Dwayne was that everywhere he went. Ohio State, obviously in Washington when he did become the starting quarterback, and then even in Pittsburgh, he was one of the guys that was loved by his teammates. Ryan Day talked about how he had a different style of leading than a lot of quarterbacks he'd worked with, just because he became everybody's friend. He did his leading in the locker room, getting to know guys. It wasn't there wasn't a guy on the team that Dwayne didn't go out of his way to get to know. And from our brief, interactions, really that 1 year when he was the starting quarterback at Ohio State, he was always fantastic. So he's a guy who I will remember for both what he did on and off the field. It was emotional when I heard, and, I didn't even know him that well. So, thoughts and prayers, obviously, to the people who did know him better. And, as you said, it's a tragic thing that we've lost a kid so young.
Pat, based on what we know at this point, what are the festivities that are planned surrounding Dwayne Haskins' passing on Saturday?
Well, it's only been a week, like I said, or it will be by the time the spring game starts. So Ohio State isn't doing anything too over the top. There'll be a video tribute for him during or after the second quarter, so at halftime. They'll also do a moment of silence. I think that's before the game. And then the players are going to wear these DH helmet decals, as you've seen for stuff like this. So that'll be kind of the basics of the spring game. They'll also still have the tribute that's been set up outside the North Rotunda at Ohio Stadium. There's jerseys and a lot of memorabilia and stuff that fans have brought. Last Tuesday, there was a candlelight vigil that a lot of fans went to, and former players, current players. So all that is still there for people who haven't gotten the chance to go by and see that and sort of pay their respects in that way. I do imagine that they will do more going forward heading into next season. What that means, I don't know. I don't see them retiring the number 7 just because it is such a desirable number, but maybe you only give that number to players who earn it. who represent Dwayne in whatever way Ohio State thinks that is. They've done that now that you can wear 0. They call it the Block O that they award to a player every year. Maybe they do something like that. I'm sure there'll be more. Ryan Day said he had a list of things, some things he thought were probably too small, some things that might be too big that he had thought of, and that was just a couple days after. So I'm sure Ohio State will have something more to pay tribute to Dwayne, because there are still guys in this team that were his teammates. Obviously, they were young guys when he was here, but still got to know him, as I mentioned, and everyone will want to pay tribute. And Buckeye Nation, not everyone is going to get to come out to the spring game, so I'm sure there will be things that fans will want to see, want to be able to take part in once the season begins and more people come to Ohio Stadium.
We talk Buckeyes football with Pat Murphy from Bucknuts 247 Sports on a regular basis, and Pat has been kind enough to join us live today to prep the spring game. So on to football, whether that be a game, practice, scrimmage, whatever you phrase it, whatever you term it, glorified scrimmage of sorts. I just got off the phone with one of my best friends who's headed to the game with his wife, so they're looking forward to it. Big Buckeye fans. All right, let's start with the format, what we know about how it's going to be set up.
Ryan Day told us that it's going to be, instead of the traditional Scarlet versus Gray, or last year they did Team Brutus against Team Buckeye, they're going to break up into offense and defense and do more of that kind of scrimmage, which doesn't lead to, a winner necessarily in terms of which team wins the game, but this will allow positions that don't have as much depth. They won't have to switch guys back and forth. And I think, honestly, you'll get to see a bit more from both sides of the ball, because you don't have to worry about getting guys in and out and things like that. So that'll be the format for the game. I think it's 12-minute quarters for the first 3 normal game clock rules. And then the fourth quarter, I think, is 10 minutes running clock. I could be wrong on the numbers there, but point is it'll be a shorter game than you're used to. Obviously with a scrimmage like this, you don't need to go the full 15 minutes and play 4.5 hours like we see in the fall. Commercial breaks will probably slow things down a little bit because it will be on Big Ten Network. But the big thing, I think, is that Ohio State will do some live tackling during the game. Ryan Day said they'll start off with kind of the thud, the little more than 2-hand touch, but then they want to get into some tackling. They want to make sure they're ready to go. And he even pointed to, week 1 is Notre Dame. So they don't have a lot of time where they can, work into guys being proficient tacklers, good tacklers. They have to be ready to go week 1. So they'll be tackling. I think that will make it more exciting as well. Obviously, you hope no injuries from that, but sometimes actually you see, guys trying to slow down and can get hurt that way. It's just not the way you normally play football. So you get the adrenaline going. I think tackling is a good idea. I think it'll only help this Buckeyes, who, remember, are installing a new defense and looking to improve on what hasn't been a great tackling team the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's the ultimate sport when it comes to the quandary that coaches have between going full bore and sharpening the skills of everyone involved versus the risk of injury because of the collision nature of the sport. But at the same time, I know tackling to many people denotes effort first and foremost. And there is certainly an huge effort component to it, but there is an art and a skill to it. And if you don't practice it, then you're not going to be very good at it, regardless of how much hard you try.
Absolutely. I mean, they've done tackling on and off throughout spring practice, probably more than they normally do, just to make sure that it is where it needs to be under a new defensive staff. Like you said, it's not just you go out there in the backyard and you hit somebody. I mean, these guys are trying to make you miss on the offensive side of the ball. You have to wrap up correctly. Obviously, with the rules these days, you have to be careful about how you hit and things like that. So the more you can practice it, the better, especially not that this is a young defense anymore, but a lot of these guys were starting for the first time or contributing for the first time last year. You saw a lot of missed tackles with this team, especially in some of the bigger games. You want to make sure that's cleaned up for sure going into the season.
Appreciate everybody being here. Again, leave your comments and questions. We'll start with Troy here, which is pretty much an extension of the first question I was going to ask, because Pat, in covering this, you have a much more difficult task than the fans, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how meaningful is this? And so you're looking at this thinking, okay, how much did this particular play, this performance, this unit mean, especially when they're playing against their teammates. So as Victor is pointing out right here, what are you looking for, and what do you think is going to be meaningful?
Well, I think it's always meaningful, the spring game, just as a tradition. You get fans in the stadium, you get the team playing in the stadium. So there's that part of it. It certainly helps young guys, the early enrollee freshmen that are on campus, even guys who have transferred in who maybe haven't played at Ohio Stadium before. But additionally, it's one of 15 practices from the spring. So it's a part of a bigger whole. And then if you look at it from an even bigger standpoint, it's kind of the start of actual football practices for 2022, which will pick up again come fall camp. So it is important in the sense that it's part of your preparation for the upcoming season. From a fan perspective, I don't know that you take too much away, and even from my perspective, I don't know if you take too much of individual performances or things like that. Obviously, they're not going to go out and show everything that they're planning on doing or plays that they've installed. But it does give you a sense of kind of where guys are in the pecking order, especially this year, offense versus defense. You don't have two teams split up where maybe, okay, well, because this guy's on one team playing defense, this guy starts here, and is this guy a starter or not? We'll be able to tell who kind of ranks where on the depth chart with the offense versus defense format. So I think there's a good amount you can take away, but I think you have to keep in mind that it is just one part of one practice in a larger whole that all builds towards 2022. But it's a practice that we all get to watch. We get to see little bits of practice throughout more than a normal person, but we still don't get to see a ton. So it is certainly a good opportunity to just kind of get a sense of where things are without making any full-on judgments about this team based on just one spring practice.
Falconer X, thank you so much for the super sticker contribution. Appreciate that. Got Pat Murphy here talking Buckeyes football. Join Pat on 247 Sports, bucknuts.com. So I'll put it this way, because that's a great reminder. It's important to us because we get to see it. It's a TV show, but it's one of 15. Therefore, you could have guys that are having subpar springs, and then for some reason they have a good day on Saturday and we get to see it, or vice versa. So let's not make too much of it. But in putting together what we're going to see on Saturday with the other 14, not that you have full knowledge of what's happened through the other 14 for sure, but putting all that together, who do you think it's been a big spring for, whether positive or negative? And again, not putting a theme on whether it's been positive or negative, but coming into the spring, who do you think this spring was more important to on offense and defense?
Well, I'll start on the defensive side just because I think in general this spring was more important for that side of the ball. I think there's a number of young guys who played last year that now have to adjust to this new defense. So really all of these guys are kind of doing this for the first time in terms of what they're doing schematically. A lot of them have been through that before. I think of a guy like Jack Sawyer, who played last year as a true freshman on the defensive line, but now could be used as this Jack linebacker or Jack position linebacker defensive end hybrid in Jim Knowles' defense. He seems like a perfect fit for that spot. So if he's going to adjust to what will be a different role than what he was used to last year and even in high school, I think it's big for him. I think a guy like Tanner McAllister, who transferred from Oklahoma State, where Jim Knowles also came from, it's a big spring for him just to adjust to Ohio State. He knows the defense. He's helped his teammates learn the defense, learn about Coach Knowles, but he's learning a whole new campus, a whole new workout facility, kind of how they go about things every day. So that's big for him to be ready, because he's probably going to be a starter in this defense, just given his experience in it. You look at the linebackers. I think that group as a whole, that group has to play better in 2022. It's a group that struggled way too much given Ohio State's standards, and you've got to see improvement there. So they've got to they'll play two guys in the base defense most of the time, and they've got to find guys that they know can go out and play at a high level. You just can't have some of the mistakes that they've had. Some of that last year was youth and inexperience, but it's also a standard that has to be met that I don't think was being met the last couple of years. On the offensive side of the ball, I think tight end is an interesting position, not because we're going to see a tight end make a ton of catches, but Jeremy Ruckert was really important in what this offense did. His ability as a blocker and a route runner. He didn't always make the catch, but he was often out there when in routes and pulling defenders away, opening space for other guys. And then his blocking ability was very important toward the run game and even in pass protection at times. He's gone. Now they need to find a guy who can do those things without having to change too many guys in depending on the play. So Joe Royer's a name that's come up a lot, a third-year player. Cade Stover moved back from defense where he continued after the Rose Bowl, played tight end again. He was Jeremy Ruckert's backup last year. G. Scott's a guy who can do a lot in the receiving game, but we haven't seen him do a ton blocking. So I think this is a big spring for those guys. Mitch Rossi's a guy who played there last year but has been hurt this spring. So finding a tight end is maybe not statistically as important as some of the other positions, but I do think it's important just because it does help the offense. And then the backup quarterback position, which will be a big deal in the spring game. I think those two guys are going to probably be the stars of the show, assuming they play well. I don't imagine CJ Stroud has to play a ton in this game, but not only are they looking to be CJ Stroud's backup and be ready in case something happens to him in next fall, but in all likelihood, they will be one of those guys will be the one, starting when 2023 rolls around. So this is kind of the beginning of that competition, which will carry over throughout the season and obviously in the next offseason. But whether it's Kyle McCord, who obviously has more experience playing because he got the opportunity next year, Devin Brown, this spring game will show us, kind of where these guys stand. Maybe if there's been any separation between the two during spring practice. I imagine Kyle McCord is still considered the backup. But we'll get our first real look at Devin Brown, who we've seen a little bit in practice and has shown some good things. So those are, I listed a number of guys there, I guess, but guys that I'm kind of interested in looking at in position groups that I think you should all keep an eye on.
And as you mentioned to me, and we spotlighted a couple of weeks ago, there's no doubt that Evan Pryor can play.
Yeah,
he's another one. But I think for the less than diehard Ohio State fan, it's going to be a reminder that, this guy was recruited and signed, and he's a pretty good player.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy who was, I think, the number 6 back in the 247 Sports composite. And if, you don't land Travion Henderson, who is the number 1 back in the country, he's a guy who people are really excited about. Obviously redshirted last year, played in the 4 games he was allowed, but a guy who can do some things out of the backfield, which could make him unique. We saw the Buckeyes do some stuff with Jackson Smith and Jigba lining up in the backfield towards the end of the season. Now, Travion Henderson can catch the ball, and you're not going to take Travion Henderson out of the game just to bring Evan Pryor in and catch. But Evan Pryor's worked hard this offseason to be a guy who can do a little bit of everything, and his ability to run routes out of the backfield and catch the ball is just kind of an extension of his ability. So, he's certainly a guy that could, you leave the spring game, and there always seems to be a guy, right, that has a really good spring game, and then it's the question of whether he can carry that over to the fall. Evan Pryor could be that guy, and based on everything we've heard during the spring, I think he'll be fine come the fall. It's just a matter of how many snaps there are for running backs. Obviously, Mayan Williams still in the mix too. How many snaps can Evan Pryor kind of eat into the 2 guys ahead of him on the depth chart? But his skills certainly complement what the other 2 can do.
Pat, welcome to our live streams here at the Voice of College Football. Here's one for you from Demetrius Rex. Bro, ND gonna smack Ohio State. They lack any sort of physicality.
We'll see. It's going to be certainly an interesting game. The first game of the season, it's always interesting to have one of the big games to start the season. Obviously Notre Dame will be under a new coaching staff, Ohio State with a new defensive staff. So I can't wait for that game to start the season. And every start of the season is exciting, but when you have a game like that, especially having it here in Columbus, and then knowing next year the Buckeyes are going to Notre Dame, that's the one I'm really excited about. I've never been to Notre Dame Stadium, so these matchups are always fun early in the season.
Especially since Marcus Freeman had some words to say that I don't think were that disparaging, but maybe they could have been measured a little bit better and framed a little bit better to show some respect for his alma mater. I didn't care for them exactly, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But at the same time, again, he could have phrased his experience at Ohio State a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, let's remember he's a competitive guy who's now the head coach of Notre Dame. I think that probably plays into it more than all actuality. I mean, James Laurinaitis was his teammate at Ohio State, is now actually on the staff of Notre Dame, but was on the radio locally in Columbus for the last several years. And, I don't think his time at Ohio State was framed very much by Marcus Freeman, as they were very close. And James didn't have anything bad to say about Ohio State. So I think it's just competitive juices flowing in that situation.
Sean, go Bucks. Michigan always sucks. Keep up the amazing work. Mark, lots of Buckeyes down in Baton Rouge representing Buckeye Nation. My question is, are we still too young to manage the tough road tests, which this year would be Michigan State,
Penn State,
Penn State, I believe the Iowa game's at home.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what we're looking at.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see how this team copes with that. I think that this team will be much more experienced. Obviously, I mean, the young guys, especially on defense, played last year. You saw that as an issue. But, even on offense, I mean, look at the number of guys who will be in their second year that are playing important positions. CJ Stroud, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Travion Henderson, a number of guys on the offensive line, DeJuan Jones, Paris Johnson, Luke Whippler. There are certainly guys that will be stepping in and contributing majorly for the first time on both sides of the ball. But this isn't a team that lost a ton of experience. You did lose some real talent in guys like Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jeremy Ruckert, some of the offensive linemen. But you have a lot of experience back on both sides of the ball. And as you mentioned, Mark, the road games aren't that troublesome. Michigan State isn't a place Ohio State struggled recently, and Sparty is obviously building back up after some down years, but Ohio State's had their way with them. Going to State College at the end of October will certainly be interesting. I'll be interested to see when we learn when that game is. There's been talk, and Buckeye fans will like this, that could be a noon game, that Fox has grabbed that game. It seems that every time Penn State comes here, it's either a noon game or a 3:30 game. And whenever Ohio State goes to State College, it's been a night game and a whiteout. But with the way they kind of pick those games, it does seem like there's a good chance Fox takes that one, in which case would obviously change the complexion of the game. The whiteout is one of the toughest environments to play in. Penn State at noon is not typically so. So that could make it easier as well. And then, you don't have a ton else on the schedule. You go to Evanston, you go to Maryland, and then obviously you get your rivals Michigan at home. So I don't think it'll be too difficult for the Buckeyes. And I do think the experience that a lot of young guys gained last year will certainly help.
Michael Campbell believes the Ohio State offensive line is going to be in trouble against Notre Dame. I don't know if he's speaking more from a Notre Dame perspective, that they're that stout along the defensive front, or disparaging to the Ohio State offensive line. But based on our conversations, Pat, it seems as though you're pretty comfortable with the starting five. I know that there are some depth issues to be worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. The front five, the first five is about as good as you're going to see in the country. You've got Paris Johnson at one tackle, DeJuan Jones at the other, Matthew Jones, who's played quite a bit. This will be his first time as a full-time starter at one guard. Donovan Jackson, who was a five-star kid, his second year, becoming a starter for the first time, and then Luke Whippler, as I mentioned. It's just behind them. You hope that from a Buckeye perspective, you hope that they can stay healthy. But if there are injuries, there's just not a ton of depth. Josh Fryer is a guy they like a lot, but he missed spring practice. Enoch Viamahe is another one that could get into the mix there. It's just, finding that 6th, 7th, 8th guy that you feel comfortable with coming in the game. And some of that will come, as you get into fall camp and you get some new guys, freshmen on campus. You'll add some more depth to that room. But yeah, it's not a very deep group right now, that's for sure.
All right, folks. Don't see anything else in regards to Ohio State football. I see a 50,000 person estimate in terms of a crowd. Pat, it seemed as though these spring game crowds across the nation at places like Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama seemed to peak about 4 or 5 years ago, where that seemed to be a big deal. And there was a push to say we had the biggest crowd, or we had 90,000 or whatever the figure was. And there was a battle between a few schools for that. And, I looked across the nation the last couple of weeks. Michigan, I know the weather wasn't great, but it looked like they might have had 15,000 people there. Clemson didn't have a great crowd, nor did Florida State and some others. Um, what do you expect at the shoe?
I think it'll be a good crowd, but you're right. I don't know why it kind of transitioned from, that kind of competition between some of those schools in terms of the biggest attendance in spring game history and whatnot that we heard about. I don't know why fans have chosen to not go out. I know Ohio State, I think the ticket prices are $7 this year, unless you're a student. So maybe, programs are charging more. I'm not really sure, but I expect a good crowd for Ohio State. The 50,000 wouldn't surprise me. The weather is supposed to be good, not great in Columbus. I think high 50s, and I don't believe there's much chance of rain. So, not a bad day to go out to the stadium if you don't have much else going on. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's also the ticket prices during the season. People are, wanting to save their money for that, or aren't going to games as often, so they don't make the trip if you're coming from out of town. It is strange, though. You make a good point, Mark.
Yeah, and I'm certain that the pandemic had something to do with it in regards to people's mindsets and the way they approach their life and activity and so forth. Um, do you know of any big recruits who are going to be on campus? Have you seen any kind of list there?
I haven't seen a full list yet. I know I was talking to one of our recruiting guys, Bill Kurlick, who does a great job this morning, and he's in for a busy weekend just because there's going to be a ton of recruits. A lot of these guys, especially guys that aren't coming from far away, don't always nail it down super early, but I know they're expecting a lot of guys. Even we were at the Ohio State Coaches Clinic today, and a couple of the coaches made comments about recruits coming in as they talk to local high school coaches about different things. So it's going to be a big recruiting weekend for the Buckeyes for sure. A number of talented prospects on campus, and this is always a good weekend to do that because you get not only the game atmosphere that comes with being in Ohio Stadium, even if it's not a full house, but the coaches get more time on a game day when prospects come to visit. The game gets done, and maybe they're able to spend some time with them, but they're quickly on to the next game and preparing for that. Obviously, you don't have that with the spring game. You're going to have plenty of time after this, so they can spend some more time with these recruits. Obviously, you want to get them, for the big games in the fall when the place is rocking. But this is a good way to kind of balance the two things and allow the coaches to spend time with some of these prospects.
Yeah, it is kind of intriguing that the number one quarterback in the nation for 2024, can't think of his first name, Raiola. He has Nebraska connections. His father played there at Nebraska, the number one quarterback. He's out of Arizona, and Ohio State certainly has their eyes on him. And I know that he's
Dylan Raiola.
Yes, Dylan, absolutely. That he's a 2024 prospect there.
Yeah, and from what I've seen from the crystal balls that the recruiting guys do on our site, a lot of pointing Ohio State's way there. And, we mentioned earlier Dwayne Haskins and helping kind of change this offense. The way Ohio State has been recruiting quarterbacks, it would not surprise me if they land another top guy in both the 2023 and 2024 class. It just, is the train keeps on coming for a number of these offensive positions for Ohio State.
Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Pat, I don't know how much stock you put into the Football Power Index, the FPI.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot to talk about there because Ohio State's number 2 behind Alabama, as expected. There's a few names that typically raise some eyebrows, and mine as well. Auburn at 10, Texas at 6. Doesn't seem to add up to me. And there has been some curious work there again with the FBI, both as it relates to ranking teams and then also as it relates to then predicting the winner of games at times. But with Ohio State, it seems to be in line with what the national consensus is.
Yeah, I did take a look at that when it came out, I think this past week. No surprise the Buckeyes are where they are. I think once the preseason polls come out, I think it'll be probably Alabama and Ohio State in a lot of the top rankings. So no surprise there. I was surprised with Pittsburgh being as high as they are. I know they got a transfer quarterback in, I think, from USC. But, you lose an established guy like Kenny Pickett. I know they lost some other guys as well. I was surprised to see them as high. Michigan too. I mean, I think Michigan will be good next year, but I don't think they'll be anywhere near what they were with some of the talent they lost, especially on the defensive side of the ball. That's a top 15 team to me, but maybe not quite top 10. And what I think they were like 6 or 7. We'll see on Michigan. Obviously, they recruit well too, and obviously what they were able to do last year, winning the Big Ten and going to the college football playoff certainly helps that. But you look at kind of the experience returning guys, and it's not the team that they had back last year. But yeah, I mean, it's the FBI, like any of the rankings that come out before teams actually step on the field. It's an interesting thing to talk about. It gives us something to write about this time of year, but it's still conjecture and whatnot at this point. I mean, I think you definitely know some teams are going to be at or near the top, but until they play the games, it's just kind of a fun conversational piece.
Absolutely. We have quite the back and forth with Michigan fans here because, we've got, for example, Steve Days from Michigan Podcast comes on and he defends the Michigan roster to say it's overblown, the narrative that losing Hutchinson, Ajabo, Haskins, Daxton, Hill, that we've lost. Basically, we've got a young team and most of it's coming back and most of the productivity, and people just look at the few stars and see it. Well, those guys are the guys that were game changers. So I understand the point that the core of the roster is back, but those are pretty high impact guys that are gone.
For sure. And, I think you look at those guys you mentioned are the ones that made plays in the bigger games of the year. And that's what you expect from your stars, right? And, not to say that Michigan won't be right there, come the end of November when they come to Ohio Stadium. I fully expect that game to have a lot on the line. I think when you're projecting Michigan for the start of the year, losing the number of guys that you just mentioned is a big deal. And let's be honest here, and this isn't an Ohio State thing, Michigan hasn't had a top 1, 2, 3 recruiting class in the country like in Ohio State and Alabama, Georgia, that you can just replace guys. They've done well recruiting. I don't want to disparage them at all, but it's just when you're going to keep it rolling like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, those type of programs, it's because you consistently replace guys with 4 and 5 star guys with 4 and 5 star guys. And Michigan has some of that, but not quite to the level of those programs that have consistently been at the top of those rankings.
And people need to realize that the spots in the recruiting rankings aren't all created equal, meaning that it is top heavy and it spreads out and drops considerably. So Ohio State was number 4. I believe Michigan was 8, but if you look at the star rankings and the composite score given, that's usually in the 0.9 range, that the difference between Ohio State and 4 and Michigan at 8 is the same as Michigan at 8 and whoever was at like 23 or 24.
Right.
That's how quickly it drops.
Yeah, and not to put all the stock in the recruiting rankings. I mean, obviously, I work for a company that does a lot of that, and we value the rankings that the guys put out. But, there's a lot of things that go into having a successful team. You've got to develop those guys. I mean, you look at, a program like Wisconsin, who's considered consistently one of the better teams in the Big Ten. Iowa was in the Big Ten championship game this past year. Neither of those programs recruit at that high of a level, but they develop talent really well. And that's the other part of it. Now, I think if you want to get to that upper echelon where you're consistently competing for not only Big Ten championships, but the college football playoff and potentially national championships, that's where the high 4-star, 5-star, the rankings, the track record is that those teams have been the ones that are up there in the rankings. So there's definitely something to it. I just don't want to make it sound like that's the end all be all, because it's certainly not.
Ohio State spring game, noon Eastern time at the Shoe. If you can't be there, Big Ten Network. In the meantime, check out Pat's work, Bucknuts 247 Sports. And then, of course, after the spring game, check out his work as he wraps it up and lets us know what it all means. Pat, appreciate you stopping by. Go enjoy some sun and some warm temperatures.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate everybody being here as well. We've got a West Virginia show coming up tonight at 8 Eastern, so be here. We've got somebody from the West Virginia staff coming on board tonight at 8 Eastern. Again, Pat, thank you so much, and we'll see everybody next time.